Hi artists! Welcome back to the 5-day still life painting challenge. Congratulations on completing day 1's painting. And you guys all did such an amazing job. I hope that first lesson was so valuable to you and some light bulbs went off for you during that demonstration and explanation. Okay, so today, as we move forward, we are going to be painting a simple Mandarin, okay? So we're really, from day to day, building up to more complex things. And we're really looking at both the similarities and the differences in painting these still life objects. And today's object is different than yesterday's in that this is a solid object that is not transparent or translucent, so the light cannot move through it. So we paint those kind of objects differently. And of course, this is a very saturated color, pure color object. So let's dive in and get started. Okay, everyone, just to keep you aware, we have 2 new colors added to the palette today. Cadmium Yellow Deep. This one's from Sennelier. I love Sennelier's cadmiums. And then also Ultramarine Blue. This one's from Vasari. I love their Ultramarine Blue. And I put the blue out today, not for the orange, but I want to make my background a little greener today than what I could do yesterday just with that ivory black. Okay, so let's get going. We're going to pretty much follow the exact same procedure. All right, so I'm starting off. Since this is such a small painting, I'm just using a number 2 filbert just to start, and I'm just going to use that raw umber. So the first thing we do is basically size and place our objects. I like to use masses rather than, lines as far as contour lines. And then I also really love to look for any kind of structural diagonals, especially in a curved form that's going to give me, just more structure, more planes and more structure. Okay, so this is my basic shape. It fills the space nicely. I still have a nice amount of space left in the picture for some atmospheric perspective, some air, some room to breathe. And then because this is a solid object, unlike our transparent object yesterday, it has 2 shapes on it. So it has a light shape and it has a shadow shape. And so the first thing I want to do is find where is that shadow shape, and I really want that shadow shape to describe the form. Okay, and I'll say again, my light is consistently always coming from this top left for this whole challenge, just so you know. And 2/3 of my form is in light, and then approximately 1/3 is in shadow. And again, I'm just using the raw umber right now, so I don't have to think about color mixing just yet. I'm just thinking in sort of like in black and white in values. Okay, and then cast shadow coming out underneath, and then, that might, in this case, might just go off the canvas, that cast shadow. Okay, then I'm going to use my paper towel to really lift. You don't want to leave any of that raw umber down there, and I don't want a raw umber outline either. So I'm actually kind of destroying a bit of my drawing here because I know that raw umber is basically going to, bite me in the ass if I don't get rid of it, especially on that lit edge. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in some background color. So we've got our light shape, our shadow shape, we've got our darks present in the foreground, and now what we need is some background color. So I'm going to put some ultramarine blue, some raw umber, okay, which is going to make kind of a more neutralized blue. Then I'm going to add some of my yellow ochre, and that's going to give me kind of a softer, earthier green versus the cad yellow. Actually, I think that's really nice. And you're going to see just how much more green that is compared to yesterday. So this time I'm actually painting my background in first because I want to do like a really nice light effect coming off of this brilliant bright orange. And so this way is going to work better. This process of doing background color first is going to work better than what I did yesterday, because this is a dark object. It's a dark object, and it's not a color that's really brilliant and going to basically reflect into the air around it. So that's why, you know, today I'm painting this in first, and you'll see what I mean here in a minute. Okay, so I'm going to get enough of that in, and then really wiping that paint out of my brush nicely. I like to just pull from the ferrule up and out, so that whenever if I need to use that brush again, I won't have a bunch of wet paint all over it. Okay, so now I need to identify what is the basic local color and value of this little clementine, this little mandarin, I guess it is. And I'm going to start with a color on my palette that really is closest to that color, and that's the Cad Yellow Deep. But this is maybe, you know, it's a little too on the yellow side, so I'm going to add a little bit of that Cad Red Light into it to get it to more of that orange color. Now, be careful. See how this pile is getting real spread out? So when you start painting light, definitely paint in a smaller pile and make sure that you're really picking up a lot of paint on the brush. And same process as yesterday. I want to really lay that paint down nice and flat. And now at this point, I'm kind of out of paint, you know, so I need to pick up some more paint, keep adding to my pile here. And this left top edge, this is the most important edge to get a really clean piece of color. Make sure it doesn't get muddy, dirtied up, or anything like that. Okay, because that's first where the light is hitting the object. Now, as I come down to this part of the form, I can actually start to use some of the ground, some of that raw umber that's still left there. And I'm even going to go a little bit darker with my Cad Red Light. Can you see how that's kind of going a slight gradation darker and a little bit warmer? And because I'm picking up some of this raw umber, it's also graying it down a bit and desaturating the purity of the color. So this is what's most often referred to as a transition zone of an object, and that's where the light is beginning to diminish on the object. And then a lot of times you have to just, you know, build up more paint and maybe get in more brush strokes that are more form descriptive, and you basically work this shape until you get the gradation just how you want it. And it's just really a subtle gradation. It's mostly all the same value in the light. It's just on this turning plane here, and I have my background color, so I can also just dip into that background mixture on the palette. It's mostly just that this turning plane here is getting a little less light, but it's not fully in shadow yet. Okay, so we just need to give a little suggestion of that. Okay, do not lose your shadow shape, however. All right, and before I go to the shadow color, because actually that value, although it's a little dark, is pretty good. It's pretty convincing as shadow color. I'm going to then do what I did on the grape yesterday. Same process, right? Like I'm going to build a little platform of light around where the highlight's going to be. And actually, this is a cool light, so we're doing cool light, warm shadows. So I'm actually going to add in a little more of that Cad Red Light because it's going to have kind of a pinkish quality and be a little cooler than that, you know, hot orange. And you can definitely see the gradation of that object here just on the palette. So some white, some Cad Yellow Deep, and some Cad Red Light in with my white. Now my brush, I'm barely kind of mixing in, and my brush is flat to that canvas again. And actually I'm curious to see if I just do some Cad Red Light and white. Okay, now this is not the actual highlight. This is kind of that haze, so to speak, of highlight. Okay, And I want it to describe that form, the roundness of this form. So I want to make my brush strokes a little more rounded there. And then again, just with some pure white, I'm just going to hit that with a crisp highlight. Okay, so it looks really lit up. And then if I want this color to feel really brilliant, and I want that clementine or mandarin to feel like, light is hitting it and then light is, bouncing off of the surface, well, then I want to take some of my orange color and just like I did yesterday with the grape, kind of carving out. I'm going to actually take that orange color around the most lit edge, which is mostly on that top plane. And then while I'm here, I can actually just reshape, got a little booger there, reshape the contour if needed. The edge of the clementine has to remain sharper, just like the grape yesterday. And then now I'm digging into the paint. As you can see, my bristles are, let's say, perpendicular with the form, or perpendicular with the panel. And so I'm basically making it look like I didn't do that technique. I'm making it a little more subtle. But can you see how that now all of a sudden it feels like light, like glowing light off of the object? And then what I can do is I can reach back for my background brush here, and I can just gradate that even more. So you can go as subtle as you want to, you can go as bold as you want to, and coming back in with like a flat to the canvas brush stroke, I can just calm down any of those crazy bristle strokes that are maybe happening back there. Okay, and last but not least, I'm just going to adjust this color and this value on the shadow color. Okay, so I'm going to start with one of my go-to shadow mixtures, which is always ivory black, cad yellow deep. Sorry, I'm reaching into the cab red light. Cab red light and some cad yellow deep. Except there's a little fleck of white in that pile, so don't want to get any white in there. Do not get any white into your shadows. No, no, no. White belongs to light. Okay? So we just have, a more neutral than what's in the light, but it still feels colorful. You can see how that raw umber was just a little too colorless. You don't really want the viewer to look at your shadow. Okay, so it needs to feel like it fits onto the object, belongs onto the object, but we really don't want to be looking at it a lot. Okay, so you do need a neutralizer in there. You can use raw umber, you can use ivory black, burnt umber even will work sometimes. And then while I'm here, I'm just going to adjust that cast shadow on the tabletop plane as well. Except it's a little too red, so I am going to add back in some raw umber to this mix. I'll just go a little more raw umber since the tabletop is more of like a neutral wood color. And then I basically look at this transition to see, do I need to finesse that anymore? And as you can see, whenever you just drag a little bit of light, I'm just kind of patting it over wet into wet. When you just drag a little bit of light over that shadow edge, that darker color, it creates kind of a cooling off sensation, or like a cooling tone, a cooler tone. Okay, now you don't want to totally lose this shadow edge, but you also don't want it to be completely hard and cut out looking either. So you do want somewhat of a softer edge there. And then the rest of this would be just modifying, building up paint or modifying the shape a little bit more if you want to. So you can go as, a little more detailed if you so choose, but we always want to start like with a simple structure like this, simple shapes first. This just needs to look lit up. It needs to look colorful. So for example, like if you wanted to add in that little, there's like a little green where the stem would be, that's going to be your choice, but it's this kind of detail right here is not going to make or break the painting. Okay, it might just add a little more nuance, a little more detail, but it's not really what is important. And so when we're learning to paint, we have to understand that painting is all about big shapes. It's really all about simplicity, simple solutions that work beautifully in paint. It's not so much about copying exactly what it is that we're seeing. Okay, so now let's get in some tabletop color. I like this deep red for that tabletop, but I just need to lighten it a little bit, so I'm going to add in and kind of cool it off. So I'm going to add in some yellow ochre to begin that process, and then a little bit of this white will work as well. Okay. So I often like to just grab okay, I've already got something on the palette here. How can I modify what I already have on the palette? And when I see this next to the orange, I'm thinking, that is too close to my orange color. So let's start a new mixture with raw umber and the cab red light, and then the white. Okay. Because I want the orange in this context to be the only really orange thing, so that it gets, a lot of star attraction, a lot of emphasis in this little study of an orange. And yellow, just so you know, is really the most aggressive color on the palette. It is the color that our human eye likes to really look at the most, those warm tones. Let's bring in a little bit of background color here from the palette into this mixture, especially back here as we go back into space. We want to put a little more of that, whatever our background color is, because that's our color of, let's say, air and atmosphere. And again, make sure you're making brush strokes, that you're being generous with the paint, that the paint has vitality, your brush strokes have vitality. Don't worry about trying to be so perfect all the time and getting it quote unquote right, or being quote unquote wrong. There is no right or wrong here. This is just paint. So for example, sometimes things like that might happen, and that's okay. We can easily come back in and kind of carve back out that contour. And actually, I find a lot of times it makes the painting better whenever seemingly mistakes occur. They're not really mistakes, though. It's just the nature of painting, especially painting wet into wet in a direct manner like this. Okay, so basically we can keep building paint on there. We can keep adjusting things as needed. And then I think I'm just going to put a little bit of reflected light in this underplane from the tabletop. So light hitting a surface is going to bounce back up into another surface. Okay. And then one thing that often gets lost is that cast shadow underneath. So I'm going to go back to that base color shadow mixture, the ivory black and cab red light. Just really bring back the sharp contrast and depth of that cast shadow right underneath the object. Because this is the part that's, not getting really any light, any reflected light bouncing into it. Now, as the cast shadow comes out and away from the object, that's when, there can be a little bit of air and reflected light in there. If you want to do one last thing, you can allow some of this orange color, just like what we did in the background, but now in the tabletop, next to the most lit up side, you can get a little reflected light or refraction of light into that tabletop as well. Okay? All right, everybody. I hope that this was helpful to you all. I hope you enjoyed it and got a lot out of it. And I'm wishing you all happy painting. Bye.